What's up, guys? Welcome back to Darth Matu's Holocron. Today, we have another episode of Darth Matu Speaks. I know, me running my mouth, it's all your favorite topic. But seriously, today, I want to continue a discussion that we had earlier. One about the nature of storytelling and the power of narrative. You guys might remember that conversation, and if not, I'll have it linked down in the description. As we discussed before, storytelling is central to the human condition. It has existed as long as we have existed, and it will continue to exist for the rest of our history as a species. It is fundamental to who we are, one of the main methods of exploration that we have, maybe the first method. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, people were bound to their group, living in relatively small geographic areas. But even these people were telling stories, wondering what lay beyond that mountain range, or what could possibly dwell deep within the forest. Our imaginations are impossible to stop. They help us to survive. Every shuddering bush has a tiger in it. Every twisted stick in the dark is a snake. This keeps us alive in the wild, but it is not restricted to the world of the physical. All of us have imaginations. It's one of the few things universal to the state of humanity. Research even shows that daydreaming is more important than many of us realize, helping to refresh our brain occasionally throughout the day. I believe that the power in stories comes about as a result of the limitations of our biology. What I mean by that is that we perceive the universe in a way restricted by the limits of our form. A human being can't see in the dark, for example, while a mantis shrimp can see every spectrum of light. We are three-dimensional beings, and as such, vast portions of the universe are completely unperceivable to us, or perceived only in warped, unrecognizable fashion. Perhaps you have heard the example of the 2D Flatlander. A 2D Flatlander is a second-dimensional being, a creature which can only perceive width and length. Now, just because the Flatlander can only perceive 2 dimensions, this does not mean that the others cease to exist. Depth still exists, for example, regardless of whether or not the Flatlanders can see and experience it. To them, a 3D being such as ourselves would appear as a series of cross-sections, just like what you are seeing on your screen right now, growing into existence out of nowhere, and then disappearing without explanation. So, Darth Matu, I hear you say, what does this have to do with stories? Patience, my young Sith acolytes. I promise I'm not just rambling. Well, maybe a little. But you see, much like the 2D Flatlanders, 3D beings like us are extremely limited. We cannot perceive the fourth dimension, for example, or any of the others above it. I'm sure some of you are already aware of that. The fourth dimension is time. And what exactly is time? Well, time is part of the fabric of reality itself. To us 3D beings, it appears in cross-sections, slices, just like the 2D Flatlander would see us. We call these slices seconds, hours, days, but the truth is that this is actually an illusion. Just as the Flatlander's perception of us is warped by the limitations of their being, so too is our own. Time does not exist in slices, it exists as a comprehensive whole called space-time. And this is where we finally get back to stories. The universe is infinite, literally. That word has no true meaning for human minds, but to put it simply, everything is likely true. There is some commonality through the universe, and we call these commonalities the laws of physics. But the universe is so vast and unending that any and every eventuality is likely to occur at some point, somewhere. Space-time stretches across all of reality, and stories allow us to be in any time and place, literally anywhere in the universe. Does this mean that Luke Skywalker is truly out there somewhere? No. Luke Skywalker is fiction, but is there a place where aliens are swinging laser swords? Almost certainly. Which means that your reactions to these stories are in part authentic. In truth, there is no way to really get ready for something like meeting aliens. If it ever happened to any of you or me, it would be unlike anything that we could imagine. But that doesn't mean that the emotions you feel in that moment won't be a shadow of what you felt when you first saw that cantina in A New Hope. This means that, however weakly, our species has begun to transcend the third dimension through stories. We can literally take an echo of what it would be like to walk into such a place without ever actually going there. Space-time is ubiquitous, and thanks to stories, we get a small, barely imaginable taste of what it is like to see the whole. Now, I know that this is a very extreme claim, but allow me to elucidate a bit. Those of you who know me are well aware, but one of my favorite primary hobbies is evolutionary anthropology. I like to think about the how and why of who we are as people, the natural explanations for complex topics like this. We already talked about where imagination came from. Behind every bush a tiger, every stick a snake, remember? In our last video about the power of narrative, we discussed how empathy allows stories to have this power. When you are reading, if a character feels something, so do you. If something sad happens, you feel sad. If something happy happens, you feel happy. The real power in stories, the ability to project our minds to any time and place in the entire universe, comes from the confluence of these two things. Our imaginations run haywire, even without our control, helping us to jump at shadows and keeping us alive in the harsh wilderness. Our empathy drew us together as a group. The exchange of emotions an integral part of the human condition, and one that each of us finds ourselves also drawn inexorably towards. This same empathy drew us to stories, these imaginative creations which could also inspire us to feel, and combined with our imagination, this gives us the power to perceive the barest inklings of a wider reality. Stories inform who we are because of this. A child watches Star Trek so they become a NASA engineer, for example. They help us take real, objective, definable actions in the real world. I'm sure most of you are aware of the predictive nature of science fiction, and this is another indication of the power within narrative. They help steer us forward into the future and into a wider universe that is greater than any of us can truly imagine. We find the truth of who we are within stories, which, at long last, brings us to the crux of the video's title, the corruption of stories. I think I've more than laid out my belief behind the intrinsic nature of stories to the human condition. To summarize, they are the key to our soul, the path towards our future, and the hope for our growth. This makes it exceedingly dangerous when the storytelling process is derailed or co-opted. Stories must remain pure, so that our window into ourselves can remain open. Awareness of a thing gives you power over it. How can we ever expect to grow and be better if we are unaware of ourselves? And make no mistake, that is what happens, and it is something we see time and time again in modern stories. Corporations have moved into our narratives, drawn by the smell of big money like sharks to blood in the water. They've co-opted nearly the entire process, buying out everyone from animators to writers to directors to actors, turning them all into just more mid-level employees who have no choice but to do as they are told. The creativity in our stories has been sapped away, replaced with boardrooms and committees, test screenings, name recognition, and nostalgia. Our modern stories are being crafted based on focus groups instead of what we carry within ourselves, and this is something that is readily apparent to a vast majority of people. How many recent franchises have had controversial new stories? Star Wars, Doctor Who, Lord of the Rings, Marvel, DC, almost every single major franchise has created works in recent years which have massively divided fan bases. This is not the kind of controversy that helps a narrative. And look, if you like new stories, such as The Last Jedi, then I am not trying to detract from your enjoyment, nor is this a judgment of you as a person. That's not the intention of this video. People can find meaning in just about anything. The co-opting of this process does not make it an impossibility. What I am trying to call attention to is the fact that these stories are being produced through a corrupted narrative process. And if stories can have real power, then what dangers lie when the process is corrupted? Allow me to illustrate what I mean. As discussed above, a properly functioning storytelling process acts as a window into the all. We can explore everything and anything with them. Of course, certain stories have different focuses, and no narrative can cover every topic at once, nor should it. But what I'm trying to say is that all things are possible in stories, and yet that is no longer the case in these new narratives. Newer products are just that, products. They're not made from a wellspring of creativity, but instead churned out by these massive companies, with one desire and one desire only: money. Because their focus is money, they don't care about the story itself beyond their ability to sell it to people. And this focus on marketing first has led to these companies injecting huge amounts of identity politics into their narratives. Stories have stopped becoming a method of self-exploration and have instead become a monument to the way things should be. And that means that everything is no longer possible in stories. For example, a female character or a character from an ethnicity that was in the past considered a minority cannot be defeated by a white male. We cannot depict truly depraved acts from villains for fear of triggering people. We can't depict cultures that we are not a part of without being accused of cultural appropriation, and we certainly can't write characters who are different from ourselves in some way. If you are a white person, good luck writing a story utilizing the rich, deep African mythologies. These things really disgust me, not the least of which reasons why is because I am sure your immediate reaction to me even bringing them up is a mental eye roll. No one really wants to worry about these kinds of things, or at least only a very small, vocal minority does. People just want good stories. They want the chance to explore, to break new ground, to learn more about themselves and the world through a gripping tale of adventure or a heartbreaking story of woe. People feel exhausted by this conversation, and for good reasons. Don't worry, I won't jaw your ear about it too much longer. I understand the fatigue. But the reason why I call these changes a corruption should be apparent. That's why I laid out for you the true importance of narrative in the first half of the video. These changes have been made in the name of equality and diversity, but the irony is that it chokes out both. Stories as they stand in their natural state help equality and diversity to flourish. Star Trek had the first interracial kiss on screen. Star Wars had a diverse cast of strong characters of all genders and colors. Even lily-white stories like Lord of the Rings push positive messages of equality, self-sacrifice for the whole, and more. They encourage us to think of characters, be they aliens or humans or whatever, as just as important as any other person. The irony in our new way of doing things, this corporate process of storytelling, is that it does the opposite. We are forced to think of every character within their predefined box. He's CIS gendered and white, or she's black and female, or they are non-gendered, non-binary, etc. It precludes the ability to internally equalize these characters because we have to keep them properly organized, even if just subconsciously. It also constrains the themes that we are allowed to explore. Some stories are dark, and I cannot stress that enough. Horror is one of the most undersung genres out there, and even outside the realm of pure horror, dark stories can sometimes help us to understand the world. But now we have to curtail ourselves for fear of triggering. A writer with an Ayn Randian-esque conservative or libertarian-themed story would have a hell of a time getting that story published, at least in the general mainstream outside of their own conservative echo chambers. This is not a statement of support for conservative politics nor for leftist politics. It is simply an observation that the mirror to our soul is now being controlled. We are only allowed to tell stories which comply with the message, and this intrinsically undermines the greatest strength of our species. How are we to learn if we can't look within? How can we possibly hope to attain and practice awareness if our main method of interpreting the world has become slave to someone else's agenda? This is a serious issue that most people have barely given thought to. Yes, there are some people who write truly reprehensible things, but that in and of itself is also important. People who live their whole lives in darkness have no concept of the light, but on the flip side, people who never experience darkness cannot appreciate the good in the world to the fullest extent. People should be allowed to write reprehensible things. Do you know why? Guess what happens when they do? They get rejected. The great wheel of history grinds down all things like that, at least so long as we continue to work hard to better ourselves. Did things like Birth of a Nation become a flagpole for racists? Yes, it did. And where's that story now? I feel like sometimes people forget that these things play out over time, that nothing ever truly happens all at once. People recognize evil when they see it, and because human beings are intrinsically good, 9 out of 10 of us will reject it out of hand, especially when the others around us are constantly striving to improve themselves and correct for these issues. That is something that we have always done. It's always happened. That's why Birth of a Nation is now one of the most reviled films in cinematic history. These modern movements, and I use that term very lightly, have co-opted the natural progressiveness inherent to the human condition in order to reinforce their own beliefs, political views, or worse, to sell a product. And this co-option has resulted in a regression where we have begun to divide people into little boxes again, where fundamental empathy based on our shared humanity is impossible because of something as superficial as the color of our skin. Anyway, I think I'm gonna wind this down, because I feel like I'm beginning to ramble now, and perhaps I didn't do a great job of elucidating on this point. It's a very complex topic with a lot of nuance, and it kind of defies exact wording. I'm not really the most eloquent person in the world. I just really wanted to make this video because I was writing the other day, and I found myself unconsciously thinking about how certain characters would be perceived, and if maybe I should change my story to avoid potential controversy. That horrifies me. Even I am susceptible to the pressure to conform to these standards, and it objectively corrupts the artistic process by injecting agenda. I use my writing, as described, to explore myself, to explore humanity, and the universe at large. Stories as a whole are good exactly for that. They are our lighthouse, our beacon leading the way forward, the only way a very, very limited and constrained animal has of perceiving things that are vastly beyond their own tiny lives. Without that lighthouse, we are lost in the darkness, and I think that is something everyone should consider. It might seem hyperbolic, but I really believe this is important. Alright guys, I'm done running my mouth. If you enjoyed my incoherent rambling, or if it enraged you to the point of aneurysm, please let me know down in the comments. You'll also find my personal Discord, or the Discord to the Praxium, linked there. You can find me in both places, and we can talk about it there. The purpose of this video is to provoke thought and discussion, and I always welcome a civil back and forth. No matter what happens, guys, we're all human beings. And I love you all based on that fact alone. Please partake in and create good, honest stories, and do not worry about conforming to some predefined standard. Create to speak to truth, and fuck the consequences. As a great man once said, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. Take care of yourselves out there, guys. And as always, may the Force break your chains.